So now that we have tasks and a way to create, edit, and delete them, next I want to add some notes on our task. Now I only want the notes to show up in this show view, but they'll just be comments or information about the task. Maybe as we do a little bit, we can add a note. Now Ruby on Rails does allow for relationships, and it also hides a lot of the SQL statement. But one thing it will not hide from you is setting up your database correctly. So hopefully you learned in another class how to manage one-to-many relationships like this. There's one task with many notes. Also, hopefully you know how to do one-to-one relationships and many-to-many relationships, which Ruby on Rails also supports. But for this video, we're going to do a one-to-many relationship where one task has many notes. So the first thing we're going to do is create a model. Now we could use the scaffolding that we used previously, but then we'd have to modify a lot. So that's why the last lecture where I did creating tasks manually, I went over that so that first you know exactly everything that happens, and second, in some cases, using the scaffolding, it's more work to modify the scaffolding to be what we want than it would be to create something on our own. And in this case, it would be easier just to create another model by scratch. So let's do that. We're going to use the generator, and this is going to look a lot like the last lecture. We're going to generate a model, and remember we want to use a singular name when we create models, so I'm going to call this a note. A note will have a title, which is a string, and a body. Now the body, I want it to be an area where they can write multiple lines of comment, so I'm going to call this text as the database type. And if you know from your database, since this note is on the many side, it's going to need to incorporate the foreign key of the task. And so the foreign key is just the task ID, and that will be an integer. So this will generate us a model just like the last lecture. Now once again, we got our model and our migration. So let's go ahead and run our migration to create that table in the database. Now opening up the model file, we can validate the presence of the title. And now let's jump into the console and see if we can connect some notes with their task. So I've done the bin rel c command and I'm in the console. So we can get a new note here, and we can go ahead and set its title and its body. And after we've set the body and the title, the last thing that we might need to fill in is the ID of the task that it belongs to. So we can go ahead and let's try to find all tasks. And I don't know what task to do this from, so let's just say the first task. So T is the first task right here, and we can also do t.id, and we can see that it has an ID of 2. So I could say the note, it has a task ID column, and I can set that equal to 2 to connect this note to that task. So now we can go ahead and save the note. That's a little bit of a lot of work. We have to find the ID of the task, and we have to save it. And we have this object-oriented programming environment. There has to be a little bit better way to connect notes with the tasks that they belong to. And another thing that will take a little bit of work, if we get our first task out again, right here, and now let's try to get all of the notes out of it. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, we can say notes equals note.where. The task ID is equal to 2 right there, and we can ask for that first note, and now we have it out there. But now we kind of have to hard code that in. There is a little bit easier way that we can get to the connected parts, so that from the task we could get all of the notes, and from the note we can grab the task that it belongs to. So up here in the model, this is the note model right here. I can tell this note model that it belongs to a task. Okay, so this one line of code lets the note know that it belongs to a task. Now, one of the selling points of Rails is it does convention over configuration. So one thing that we didn't have to do is tell the note that the foreign key is called task ID. By default, saying it belongs to a task, it will use a task ID column. So if I name that column something else, like master ID or something like that, then I would have to add a little bit more information here telling this line of code what column in the note model is the one that we want to join on to find the tasks. So by default, hopefully it will use this convention over configuration, and just by saying it belongs to a task, it will know to use the task ID column. Now, exiting and re-entering into the console to pick up that change, now what we can do is say n equals note.first. So we got the first note out, and now I can say note.task. And if you notice, it generated a SQL statement for me, and it got the task that this note belongs to. Pretty neat to be able to connect those tasks in. We don't have to know anything about a foreign ID column. Now we just know that a note has a task. Okay, we can do the same thing for tasks. Opening up the task model this time, we can say that the task model has many notes. Okay, and now make sure it's spelled has many right. Now this is smart enough to know, okay, well there must be a model named note, and notice the plural name here. It'll singularize that and say there must be a model named note, and that model must have a foreign key called task ID, because that's how you set up databases on a one-to-many relationship. So once again, we have to make sure we include that task ID in the note to make this work. But now, and we can manage the relationship all on our own, but now we will have nice methods to be able to get to notes. So let's save that change and go back into the console. And remember, whenever we make changes in our code, we have to exit the console and re-enter it in. So now I can say t equals task.first, which is our task, and then we could say t.notes, and it will give us all of the notes that belong to this task. Now, one thing to note, the foreign key, the model that has the foreign key, which in my case is the note model, has to have the belongs to task in it. And the model that doesn't have the foreign key, the one side of it, has to have the has many in order to make this work. Now, it's not required to put these lines of code in. You can maintain the relationship on your own. These two methods, all they add is a property. In this case, on the task model, it adds a property or a method that you could call on the task objects called notes that gets you all the notes that belong to the task. And on this case, it adds a method that you can call on the note model that will give you the task that the note belongs to. So now that we have the model all done, let's work on our views and controllers, the user interface part. So we need a new controller for this, so we'll use the generator to generate a controller for us. We'll call it the notes controller, and notice that's a plural name instead of a singular name. And for now, we'll just include the index action. So that'll create us a controller, and also it added a route in there, and it also created us a view for the index view. Now here's the route that it created, but we want to do the RESTful routing again. So let's take out that line right here, and we could do resources notes right here, just like we did with tasks. But now let's review some of this RESTful routing and what we want our URLs to look like. So just in the comments here, if we want to see all of our tasks, the URL is just tasks. If we want to see a specific task, we add an ID on that, and of course we make a GET request to do that. But now we have tasks that maybe we've seen this task, and we want to see all of the notes that belong to that task. This would be the URL that we want. And if you notice, the URL is kind of nested inside of the tasks. So we get a specific task and then see that task's notes. And if we want to see a specific note, we can put an ID there. Now these numbers right here that show up in the URL are a variable. You can enter in whatever numbers you want, but this one becomes the note ID, and this one would become the task ID. So how do we get this nested paths or URLs right here? Well, we just put a block right here and include inside of this. And so this gives us the resource that we had from the last video. And then this right here adds on notes as a nested route underneath it. So now all of the notes will be nested underneath a specific task because there's one task and many notes. Now this is the task show view, and I'll just create a link to see all of our notes that belong to this task. So this is, we're viewing one task, we're creating a link to view all of the notes that belong to this task. So the URL for that would be /task or tasks, some ID for the task that we're viewing, /notes. So how do we create that URL? Well, we just say task notes path and pass in our task here so it can put that ID number in the URL. So again, this is a helper. It knows to add the /notes on the end from this part right here, and it knows to add the /task with this task's ID. So we're viewing the task that I added the note on. If you notice, the ID right there is /2, and let's just refresh. Now we have that notes link that I just added on. We'll click here, and sure enough, we're on the notes index path. So why is this the index? Well, this is the view to display many notes, or all of the notes that belong to this task. And sure enough, the URL is tasks /2 because we're viewing task 2's notes /notes. So back in the notes controller here, we have this blank index action that we need to fill in with our code. What we want is to create a variable that we can use in the view, so that's the @ sign in front of this. It becomes an instance variable so we can use it in the views. So we could say @notes. Now we don't want to say note.all because we only want to view the notes that belong to the task that we are viewing. Well, what is that task? Well, we got to pull that task out of the database as well. So we want to say task equals task.find. And in our params hash, we'll have a task ID. Now this comes from the RESTful routing. So when we have a URL, say /tasks/54/ notes that this thing goes to, the 54 or whatever number is in the URL will get pulled out and put into this parameters hash right here, and we can pull it out by the task ID. So then we can say, now that we have that task, we can use what we set up in our model and just ask for all of the notes that belong to that task. And it's as easy as that. Now, for all of these methods inside of the notes controller, we're going to want to pull out this task. And so we'd have to repeat this for every method. And since we know we're going to do it in every method, let's just do that in a before action filter. So before any action gets called, call the load task right here. And then, so that says call the load task method. So then we can add this method down here in a private area and load task. And we'll just put this code right here. Okay, so once again, this before action, before any of our actions are called in the public area, it will make sure that we call load task first, and we'll set this variable here. So now all of our methods will have an @task variable that they can use to get at the notes that belong to it. Now going into the notes folder in the index view right here, I quickly replaced the default that was created by the generator with this code right here. So we're going to set the title to the task's name. Now we know that the task was pulled out in the controller, so this will just pull its name and that will set our title. And then we're going to loop through each note in that we set up in our controller and print out its title right here. So let's see how that looks. And refreshing, we see the completed console edited, and that's the title of the task right there. And here's my paragraph with the name of the note. Now we created this note in the console, so if we're viewing a different task like this one and view its notes, we see that there are no notes on this one. And just looking up here, see that's task 3 with /notes. But the one that we added the task to, if we remember, was task 2. So we go back to task 2, and sure enough, now we have the note that we created in the console again. So next, we're going to add a way to create new notes onto our tasks. So we'll create a link here that will say new note, and from there we'll create a form to be able to create a new note. So on the index view of the notes, I added some more HTML to make our notes more complete and print out the body. And I also added a new link down here to create a new note. And if you notice, it says a new task note path. And again, this is our RESTful routing helper that creates URLs. And the URL it will create will be something like this. We'll go tasks, and we'll have the task ID, then notes, and then the new after it. And that URL will route to the notes controller and the new action, and we should be able to get a form back. And I also added some CSS to my note, just the same way I did to my task, to get this box around it. And you notice the new note button right here. So when we click it, it'll go to a form to create a new note. Now let's go look at the code for this form. You'll see that I added a new method, and just like in when we created tasks, I create a new note and save it as an instance variable so we can use that in the view. And then we go to the new view right here, and I created a form very similar to the form that we used for our tasks that has a title, a body, and a submit button to create the note. And I've also already added this error messages here. So if there's any errors, we'll get any validation errors, we'll get an error there. Now one difference between this form and the form that we use to create tasks is what we passed here for the model. If you notice, we're passing it an array with both the task and the note, because this form needs to be able to create the URL to submit new notes. And in that URL, we're going to have to include the ID of the task that the note belongs to. That way, when we go to process the form, we can add the note and make sure it belongs to the right task. So under the RESTful routing, that URL would be tasks, and then whatever the ID of the task would be, and then notes. And then using a post request to this URL, it will create a new note or get rerouted to the create action in the notes controller. So we need to pass in this array up here. Now, just in case this is just a note, don't actually add this to your code. So now let's fill out this form and see what happens. And of course, I haven't created the create action in my notes controller, so let's do that. So we'll add a method called create, and this is going to be a lot like the create method in the task controller. So the first thing we'll do is we'll do a note right here, and equals a new note. And we need to pass in the note parameters. So once again, we have to add that down here. So creating a note params function that requires that there's a note and is going to permit us to fill in the title and the body. So if you remember, we had to do this with a task as well. And we can go ahead and say right here, note params. Now the one thing is this note has no task that it belongs to, so we can say note.task equals the task that was loaded out. Now remember this before action, make sure that we called load task, so we're going to have this task variable right here, and so this note is going to make sure this note's task is going to be set to that task. And then we can do the same thing. We can try to save the note. And if it works, redirect them. And if not, send them back to the form to fix their errors. Now we can actually save a little bit of work with these two, turn these two lines of code into one line of code. And that would be if the task has the notes method onto it, and this is like an array, so this is append this into the array. So append this note right here, and this automatically sets that task variable on the note and then tries to save the note in the database. And then right here, if it works, we'll redirect to the task notes path that will display all the tasks, and we can put a message here for a note created. And if it doesn't work, just like before, we'll render the new view. So that does not call this method. It leaves this note with all the validation errors in memory, and the view that it chooses is the new view right here, and the form will see that the note has errors and put the errors on the screen. So let's try this out. First, we'll try creating a note without a title right here. And you could see there's an error right here, so we can add a title here, right here, and we created, and sure enough, now we have a new note. Next, we need a show view, so we can click on this and see one note, and then we need to edit and update. Now the first thing that I did is I moved my note HTML into a partial. So I just cut it out of the index view and I put it into the partial. And I also added this link to unless current, just like we did with the task. So the text that will show up will be the title of the note, and the path is a task note path. And we're passing in the task. Notice the @ sign. That's because in our controller, in the load task, we save that as an @task. So if we're going to use that @task, hopefully this will run. But in our index action, in our show action, which I'll talk about later, we do this load task, which saves that variable. So, and here, notice there is no @ sign. Well, that's because this is a partial, and the note is passed in as kind of like a method call as a local variable, instead of using the instance variable right there. And so then in the index view, we're going to render out all those notes. So refreshing, hopefully everything works, and now we have links to click on for our show view. So now remember the before action load task will get called on all of these methods, so the show view will have the task loaded out of the database already. Now we're going to load the note out of the database using the param ID right here. So in the URL, on the show URL, we'll have tasks, and some ID, and then notes, and then some ID for the note. So this will be the ID, and this right here will be the task ID right here. So it'll pull those out, those IDs out of the URL so that we can load them out of the database. And now looking in the show is pretty simple. We'll just have a title that will be the title of the note, and we'll render out the note partial. Now remember, once again, the render call looks at this and says, what kind of object are you? And it says, I'm a note. So it's going to look in the views, notes folder, and find a underscore note.html file to use as a partial right there. And then it's going to pass this note in for the note variable that we're using right here and right here and right here. So now we can click on notes, and sure enough we have notes. Now let's try one thing. All of the notes belong to this completed console edited task. Well, what if, let's go try to add a note onto another task right here. So there's no notes for finished validation, so we'll call this validations note. I belong to validations, and we'll create that note. And sure enough, now we have this note right here. So let's go back to here. First of all, let's just take a note of the ID of this note. So we'll click here, we're viewing this note. We'll see that that's note 3, and it belongs to the task validation. Or it belongs to the task finish validation. Let's go up here to the completed console. Now this is a different task that has these two notes. Right here we'll view one of them, and we'll notice that that ID is 2, but now let's try to view and change this URL and change it to note 3. And now we're like, wait a minute here, this note doesn't belong to the task number 2. This note belongs to a different task. Now this doesn't seem like a big deal, but if this were, say, a system that collected credit cards, and we had users, and the users have many credit cards, then one user, if he's viewing a credit card, he could try changing the ID up here in the URL and try to get at other users' credit cards. And that would be very bad. Security hole. So let's shore that up. So we see here when we're looking up the note, we're always finding the note by just the ID, and we never look at the task to see if this note actually belongs to the task that we're loading out up here. So we really want to limit this note to just the notes that belong to the task whose ID is in the URL, or this task that we load up down here. Since this task is already loaded up, what we'll do is we'll just go at task.notes, use that notes variable that was added on by adding the has many notes on here, and then we can do a find call on that, and that will limit it to just notes that belong to this task. So we'll go back here, we'll view this task again, and we'll see its notes. Yep, it has these two notes. We'll click on one, and now we'll try to see if we can get to some other tasks notes, that third note right here, and we have an error message. Now we're in development mode right now, so it's saying this is a record not found. When we launch this or deploy it to production mode and release it as a live website, this page will turn into a 404 error, which just means that this page is not found anymore. And I'm sure you've seen those a lot of times. Whenever you click on a link and it doesn't work, you get a 404 error. So that's exactly what we want to have happen. So if someone tries to go up here and hack in these IDs in our URL to try to get at other users' information, they'll just get 404 errors. So what we have remaining to do is to do the edit, update, and delete actions, and that's going to be mostly the same as what we did with tasks. So I'm going to do that off camera, and then I'll show you all of the code that does that. So the first thing I did was on the show view for our notes, I added links to edit, delete, and also to go back and see all of the notes for that task. So I'm going to create new notes still. And then on the show page for the note, we get the edit, to delete, and all notes there. So let's see the code for that. So on the notes show view, I added these links, and we just have to add the task. Before it was edit task path, but now it's edit task note path. And when we need both IDs, and so to remember how to make this method and the URL and what you pass in, well, to edit it, it needs to know the task ID, and it also needs to know the note ID, so it can make the URL slash tasks slash ID slash notes slash some ID slash edit, which is and we do a get request on this, and we get the form to edit a note. So this will make that URL, and then this right here, the task note path, will make a URL that looks like this: task, the ID, or sorry, tasks, the ID, notes, and the note ID right there. And the task notes path will just create a URL like that. So that adds the notes on there. So the next thing we're going to need to do is add in our edit and update methods. So the edit and the update, and if you notice the show, just like we did on our task controller, we added a load note method right here, and inside down here, this is what the show used to do, but now that's going to happen in a before filter, because we need to do that in the destroy, the update, and the edit is to load that note out of the database. So now we have the before this gets called, it'll load the task and then the note. Now the order of this really matters, because we need to load the task first, because we're going to use the task to load the note. So if I were to switch the order of this, it would call load note first, and then task would be undefined. So the show and the edit both, it doesn't look like they do anything, but they load the task out and then they load the note out. Now the update method is going to be pretty much the same as the task update method, except for we're going to update the note. And I'll talk about this redirect a little bit later on, but let's go talk about our views, the edit view. So the edit view, And just like with our task, I took the form that was in the new view, I took it out. I also added a cancel link to go back, but I took the form out and put it into a partial. And the only thing that I changed is this right here, so that it can change to say update note. If the note hasn't been saved, it will say create note, and if it has been saved, it will say update note, just like we did with the task. So the new view now renders that form. So again, the string says look in the current directory for a partial card called form. And there it is. So there's our new, slightly modified, but now our edit can look pretty much the same as our new. Again, we have the cancel right here. And so what's this? Well, I have two options that I can pass in here. One, I can pass in the task note path and pass in the task and the note. But link2 also will also take a model and then find its URL that way. But in this case, because they're nested, we need to know the task ID and the note ID. So just like in our form where we passed in the array up here so that we can get the task ID and the note in the action on our form, on the edit on this will make a URL right here that goes /tasks with an ID /notes with an ID. And the ID of the task will go here, of this task will go here, and the ID of the note will go there. So that's, if you want to do that, you can do an array, or you can just say the task note path and then pass both of those in. All right, so there's my edit note right there. And let's go see if that works. So we can click on the edit, try to give it a new title, and sure enough, we have the form, and we can click update. And now let's go see what the update code does. Now back in the notes controller, remember the before action loads the task and the note out, and then we just update the note based on the params that were submitted. And again, that uses this same note params method right here. If it works, we redirect them back to see the note, but of course we need the task ID to know what ID we should put in for the task, so that's why we put an array here. And then notice that the note was updated. If the note couldn't get updated, then we'll render the edit action and it'll show the errors. And when it tried to save this, it will have validation errors. It'll show it on the edit page. So there's the update code. And let's go ahead and try this if we have errors. So we'll go to edit this note right here and click update. Yep, we got errors. And add it back in, and that works. So the last is the delete method, and that's all working right there. And so let's see that code. And once again, I'm clicking on the delete link. It has a task note path. So the URL that will get made will be /tasks with an ID and notes with an ID. And then this here makes it do a delete request to this URL, and this right here pops up the JavaScript to make sure they really want to delete it. And then in the controller right here, the destroy is pretty much just the same, except for instead of redirecting just to a task, we're doing the task notes path. So again, most of this is pretty much the same as what we did when we created tasks, just with slight modifications of the URLs right here. And the other slight difference is the load note. Remember, for all of our notes, we're loading it through the task, so we're making sure that the note belongs to the task. And if it doesn't, we'll give them a page not found error. Now, when we did this, we created new pages for all of these actions. Now, if we want, we can actually combine some of these actions with this. Like, maybe we don't need to see each note. Maybe seeing all of the notes for the task would be fine. And in fact, maybe if we saw all of the notes below the task on the task show page, that would be better. So we might not need the index action for this because we could put this information on this page. So let's try that first. So we can do these links. We can add an H2 tag here and we can put our notes below this. And so how would we do that? Well, we would just render the task on all of the notes. So now on the task show page, we'll see all of the notes that belong to that task. So if we go back to all of our tasks, when we go to see one task, now we have links to edit this task, and now we have all of the notes. And watch, these links go right to the notes. So there's, and we can edit and delete that as well. Now, what if we wanted to click a button here to add a new note to this task so we can add a link that way? Just add a link to, and we can put new note right here. And the path is a new task note path. And we'll just pass in the task right there. And if we want, we can make this link look like a button using the Bootstrap button helpers. So refreshing, now we have a new note. And we can go right to the place where we can create a new note. Even more, we can add the form to create a new note right here and not even have the new note button. So we can just render in the notes folder the form right here. And so this is the great thing about partials, is they're reusable. So we already have the form that's being used on the edit, or this form that's being used on the edit and the new, but we can also use this same partial right here. So if the partial's in a separate folder, we just have to include the slash right there. But now when we click on that, we're going to get this no method error. Now this really sounds confusing because it looks like it's a method and that we can't find it. But if we look, the method is getting called on nil. So whenever we see this, that means we have something that is nil. So what on this line might be nil? Well, we need a note, an empty note, to draw this form up. And in our task controller, the controller that's actually controlling this here in our task controller is the show page on our task. And if we're going to draw up a form there, we need to have an empty note. So again, this is in our task controller. We're adding a new empty note that will help that form get drawn up. And so now we're seeing the task. We can edit, delete, and delete the task. We see its notes. And here we could just create a new note. New note. Okay, now there's the new note, and going back to that task, you can see, yep, the new note worked. Now we might want it to redirect to this page instead of this page right here, and maybe on this page we might want a link to go back to just the task as well. But so now we can do that. And one other thing, which I won't do, but we can also add the edit and delete links right here, and it's really not a lot of work. Actually, I will do it. So on the notes show page, we have these edit and delete links right here, and I'll just copy them. And then on the partial that draws up a note inside of here, so this is the note partial, we can add edit and delete links. Now the only thing is remember, note doesn't have an @ sign, it's a local variable. So we'll have to take that @ sign off. And refreshing, now we can edit and delete without having to go to the show page of the note. So we can simplify this site by putting those actions all on one page. And it doesn't hurt to have the single page too. You can have them both, or you can reduce some work by kind of combining those pages together. The only thing that you might want to do is make sure after we edit that we redirect to the right spot so that we don't get confused. And then you might want links here to go back to the task, and maybe some better titles so that you know where you are in the site. But that's all I'll demonstrate for this video. Thanks for watching.